question right now with COVID, but people need to sort of change some of those hopes and dreams, at least for a while. But there's no right and wrong. And, each person, it's an opportunity to think about, how do I want to live this next stage of my life? How do I want to be the best person that I can be? How do I want to be remembered? There's often that shift to also wanting to think about our legacy, not just financially, but, how do I touch people? And generally every day in our interactions, we're leaving a legacy. We're sort of living our legacy. But I think as we get older and knowing we live longer, people are a little bit more intentional about it. So people are writing memoirs, or people are wanting to do recordings and talk about the family stories that have been sort of in the closet, or putting pictures together. There's so many different ways of thinking about how to age and how to stay connected and how to stay vital. So I think that's a big shift that's been happening. Longevity revolution, the paradigm shift. I think a lot more focus on positive psychology, of really focusing on the connection, engagement, purpose and meaning, relationships, achievement. And when you think about it, we get that from work, or we get that from active parenting. And so it's important to think about, how will we build that into our life in this next stage, so that we can feel the connection and engagement, purpose and meaning. So we have that sense of well-being. Because I think being able to, I think that's part of the shift too, of being able to age as vitally and healthily as we can, knowing that even with the best of care, we're all going to get older and our bodies change, and there can be cognitive changes, but there's no reason not to be more whole and vital, hopefully to the end. I mean, that's why I like Roger's book so much too, and his work. It's like live long and die short.
Dori, your career has been focused on transitions and also mindfulness. So tell us why those two are so important.
As I mentioned before, I think so much of life are a series of transitions, so that throughout life, there are endings, there's unknowns, there's new beginnings. And I think this next stage of life is very similar. And so what I always suggest to people is think about, how have you handled prior transitions in your life? Do you have more trouble with the end? Do you have more trouble with the unknowns? Do you have more trouble with the new beginning? With all of it, part of it, none of it? I think that by thinking about transitions just as a normal part of life, it sometimes can help us anticipate where the harder part will be for us. And so it can help us think about, what might I experience? What's going to be the hardest part in this next stage of life? Is it leaving a job? Is it, the not knowing what I want to do? Is it really believing that I can do something different and to have some trust and confidence in myself? And I think that there's where there's the interface, I think, with the positive psychology, that the focus is on strengths. It's on our character strengths. It's on what gives us pleasure, what makes us happy, what helps contribute to our well-being. And I think, as I had mentioned, I really am a believer of the connection, engagement, and purpose and meaning. However you define that helps you kind of ground yourself in the world and feel part of the world and feel like you can give back and feel like you can learn from people. And I think that importance of the interdependence of people, intergenerational learning, from older to younger, from younger to older. For some people, being a grandparent or being an aunt or an uncle may be where your purpose is. For others, it may be working. It varies. So I think that's sort of where the interface maybe is of transitions and positive psychology.
I've often thought there should be an app for, connecting a person with decades of experience and wisdom to someone like me who's seeking, for example, right now I have a tool shed that's full of tools. And this isn't my area of expertise at all. And I just want to go on an app and find a person in my area who would be willing to come over and be like, this is what this does. This doesn't work. There's no point in fixing it. Guide me and show me. And I also want to learn a second language. And my first thought is, let me go to an app and find a person who will speak conversationally with me. So I don't think that exists, but I think it should exist so that we can more readily connect that way and exchange wisdom and knowledge.
I think an app like that would be terrific. There actually are some, not necessarily apps, but I do think that's a great idea. But organizations like Encore.org, which have stories of people, and what they're doing in this next stage of life. And I know that Mark Friedman has been really involved. It's part of Encore now, the Gen to Gen, generation to generation, where people get matched up with younger people. There's organizations in most communities I think it's called SCORE. So it's older professionals who might have a skill like a financial advisor or a lawyer who volunteer and might help startups and help people, how to, kind of problem solve if they're starting, or how to set up a budget, or how to create a mission statement. So there are some of those things happening, with the belief that for society to really excel, we need to reach out and interconnect and be interdependent with each other.
We're going to have to research that and see if it's out there. And by the way, when I started my own business many years ago, I spoke with a SCORE counselor because I was so concerned I was going to screw up. And he's like, the first year when you do your taxes, and if you mess up, just say you're sorry and they'll fix it for you. They're not going to haul you off to jail for making a mistake. And he was the one that said, you're doing everything the right way, go for it. So it was just having that encouragement from somebody who was retired. And he said, which was not untrue, businesses are like potato chips. Once you start your first one, you'll never stop. You'll want another one and then another one. But Dori, before I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I wanted to say that I really loved what you said about being mindful because, the only thing that we know for sure is change is going to happen, whether we like it or not. And I loved your look at kind of taking some mindful reflection over what part of the transitions are giving you the most trouble. Getting started, not knowing what's going to happen, or once you start moving into it. And that was really, really powerful for me because everybody's going to be different. And knowing that ahead of time, you can get the support you need to get through that portion.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you picked up on that because I do think that's really important. I think part of what is so nice is to have this opportunity with living longer, if we so choose to be mindful, is to reflect, to think about where have our problem areas been, what's been the most struggle, what do I do well, what are my strengths, what do I want to offer other people. But it just helps normalize it. And I always think a nice little exercise for people is to, think about what are 3 things you're most proud of, that you've accomplished in your life, and why. And what are maybe 3 or 5 really peak experiences that you've had in life, and why? Because it helps you then think about, is it what you've achieved? Is it the people you were with? Is it what the experience meant? Is it, it could be any of those combination of things, but again, can help both inform feeling gratitude and thankfulness of what you've achieved, help you recognize you may have more resilience than you realized, and help you carve out some of those things, that you're curious about, sort of your bucket list or things you're curious about that you want to do if you have the opportunity, in these next years that are coming ahead.
Well, that's right in line with I'm sure the term gerotranscendence. As we get older, we begin to think about things that matter to us and to our life and to our legacy. Well, talk about transitions. We can't do anything these days without talking about what's happening to us. It is huge, and it is a shared global experience, and it has caused things to happen that I don't think anyone could have predicted. Maybe Fauci could have predicted it, but I don't know. It is quite remarkable. So this is a huge transition. And I think people are beginning to realize that this just isn't just a passing thing, that this is a transition to what some call a new normal, or recent term Teresa introduced me to, next normal. Because I think that a little bit of a nuance there, but that is much more in tune with what's really going to happen. That, life as we have known it is not going to come back. So that's a huge transition at any age, but particularly at an older age, that is huge. So what advice might you have for someone sort of struggling with that?
Well, you're right. We can't even underscore what a huge transition it is, both individually as well as, for our society, our world. And I think, it's interesting because it's bringing ageism to the forefront in a sort of a difficult way, in that, people are considered older if, they're 65 and older, but they're also considered older if they're 40 or 50 and older if they have underlying health conditions. So it's so important for people, to sort of recognize and not totally buy in to more of that ageism. I mean, it is true that as we're older, we're more vulnerable, and some of us are more vulnerable than others because of underlying medical conditions. And I think that it's so important for people to be mindful and shelter in place and wear masks and wash your hands and really take care of yourself. I think also, though, and some people are saying that now 60 is feeling like the new 90, because, everybody's sort of focusing on, you're old. And we do need to protect and take care of ourselves that are older, not for ourselves. And also, I have a husband who's in his 80s who's also got underlying medical things. So anything I were to do, I could bring home, or our son who's younger, who's now living with us right now. So it's affecting all of us in an interdependent way. And I think that hopes and dreams in some ways have to get altered. If travel was a big part of one's kind of wish for kind of retirement, that has to be on the back burner now. There's no travel happening, and it may be for a long while that there may not be traveling. And I know we've talked about in our family, we may not as a couple be able to travel during our lifetimes because of what we don't know about, how this is going to play out, and vaccine, and enough people going to take it, and what will happen. So but I think recognizing that there's some benefits of being older, dealing with this, and that we've dealt with things before. We dealt with those transitions. That's why I think the transition part is helpful, to really recognize we as older people have more resilience than our younger counterparts, because we've dealt with some of the ups and downs of life. Not that you want to say, I want to suffer, but we've all gone through our share of whatever's been hard. And I think being grateful of that perspective and that wisdom, and recognizing and having empathy also for other ages. I mean, I worry about kids my son's age and younger who aren't even able to get started in their life, where everything's on hold, kids graduating from high school, out of college, wanting to go to, professional schools, and everything's sort of in limbo now. And we don't know what's going to happen in terms of education. Will it be in person? Will it not be? Will people get jobs? I mean, so those in the middle age range and the younger and middle age range, are really in a difficult position. And I think pre-retirees, people may have had a plan, I need to work, I want to work. And maybe with the pandemic, you're not going to be able to work. There are a lot of jobs that luckily, some people can do remotely. I think I saw some statistics that, of people 65 and older, about maybe 44, 46% can work remotely, but there are a lot of people who can't. And people may lose their jobs and don't have the retirement nest egg. So it's hard for everybody. But I think that there are some silver linings to keep in mind too, which is people are reaching out and being kinder to each other and trying to focus on some of the gratefulness, and and the reaching out maybe just via Zoom, And I really do encourage listeners, if you happen to be part of a statistic that doesn't use